good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where we dare to ask questions that you do not normally hear in the mainstream media. So, before we begin, I'm going to ask people that if you're listening to this later on YouTube, go ahead and click on the link to my website. It's there in the corner. Or become a subscriber to be able to keep up on more recent shows. And tonight, what I'd like to do is answer a question that I've heard people ask. I've actually even had questions mailed to me on this. And that is this, in regards to psychopathy. What if you're close when you take these tests? And let's just say, there are a lot of tests out there on the internet that actually do ask the questions that are used to try to determine if a person has a psychopathic personality. They're valid questions. If you see stuff like, what color do you like, or something like that, or what time of the month you were born, forget those things, because those don't actually have any validity. But you can usually find that many tests where they look very similar to the ones used by Robert Hare, or maybe more of the traditional checklist on psychopathic personality. But regardless, you take this test, and let's say it says that in one country a 30 and above, it means that you may be a psychopath. Now, in some countries, it's 25 and above. But let's say you're one of those people that, you're close, but you're close, but no cigar, as Bill Clinton would probably say. Let's say you're like an 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and you take the test over and over and over, different variations, and it comes out the same thing. You don't quite get up there to the level that you would be listed as officially a psychopathic person. Now, the thing is that I have to point out, you gotta realize these tests, to really see if someone is clinically diagnosable, okay? And a lot of psychologists don't even do a diagnosis for psychopathy because it's not technically in the DSM. But it's still used by many psychologists. It's used by criminal justice workers and so forth. Now, you take it over and over, and you just don't make it up into the official categories. And so you're wondering, well, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to try to explain it tonight, okay? If you're close, but not quite a psychopath. Now, let's say you go to one of the tests. I've got one of those here, and the first question is, you have glib and superficial charm. And you're going, hey, that describes me. Everyone says that, I'm talking in the sense that if you were a person taking this, okay, I'm not describing myself necessarily. But you look at glib and superficial charm, and you're thinking to yourself, everyone's told me I'm very charming when I want to be. People have told me I have this ability to be the ultimate diplomat, in the kind of the Henry Kissinger way, or the Machiavellian way. If you want something, you know how to use the English language to get it, okay? And you know how to use gestures and those kinds of things. You can really get someone kind of, trapped under your spell. Kind of like when the vampire stares right into the eyes of the person he wants to make into a servant. Okay? You put down, a 2. You say, okay, that everyone says it. It must be something that is part of my personality. So you say a 2. And then you go on, and you see grandiose self-worth, and then you're thinking, oh my gosh, how do I feel about life? I've known people who actually say that when they see people, they actually evaluate them on whether they should reproduce or not, and so forth. And that's somewhat narcissistic, but you got this grandiose self-worth. You kind of you look at Donald Trump and you're going, he and I have a lot in common, and I could say I think Donald Trump has this trait, okay, but at least in the grandiose self-worth. I'm not saying he's a psychopath, and so you put down a 2, okay, because you kind of know that you walk by a mirror and it's like, oh, look there. So then you go for need for stimulation or proneness to boredom, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that is just me. And then you go to pathological lying, and maybe you're thinking, that's not really true, although maybe I know how to twist the truth in kind of a Bill Clinton sort of way. Give yourself a 1 on that one. And then cunning and manipulative, and you're thinking, well, if I have to be, I sure do good in sales. And when, or maybe you're in some other profession where you could just turn on the charm, but you also know how to get the person to sign on that dotted line. So you give yourself a 2. And then you're thinking lack of remorse or guilt. You may feel disappointed when you do something bad to someone, or you feel like you don't reach a goal or something, but you don't have that kind of, oh, I'm crying because I feel like I've done someone wrong. Okay, so you give yourself a 2 on that one. And then you go into the shallow effect, which basically means, you can be robotic when you need to be. If you're like a waitress or a pizza delivery person, and it's just been a horrible day. But you know that if you really show interest in the customer when they're saying something about what's going on with them, even though you don't know them, you could sit there and go, wow, yeah, I really relate to that, and so forth. But let's say it's not completely, so you gave yourself a 1 or a 2 there. And then you go on to parasitic lifestyle, and you're thinking, no, I work for a living, I don't depend on anyone. And then poor behavioral controls, you're going, oh my gosh, yeah, I do. I've always had that tendency if someone calls me in the middle of the night to say, sure, let's go to the party. Or something. So that counts. Doesn't mean you're going out there and committing a crime, but maybe you're the kind of person that will act on a dare. So you give yourself a 2. You're always the one that got the term paper done 3 hours before it was due by the professor, because you were doing other things that you just couldn't resist. Okay. And then promiscuous sexual behavior. Now this is an interesting one, because there is a class of psychopaths. In fact, the character I make in my book, Freedom from Conscience, especially the first one, Melanie's Journey, the person is a virgin, because even though she's psychopathic, she feels that there's no one out there that's really at her level. So, and there are psychopathic people who have those kinds of feelings, that they just don't go out there and try to seduce the neighborhood, because they're thinking, oh, well, no, I don't want to be with anyone unless they're like it. And it could be that the psychopath can actually be a sapphisexual. Sapphisexual, yeah, the person who is really into intelligence, because you can have cerebral psychopaths. These could be people who are very intelligent psychopaths, who tend to look at things in a very analytical manner, and they like to play around with ideas. I think, you could say that maybe Nietzsche. I think definitely Marx. People like this are the kind of people who could be considered the cerebral psychopath. Often cult leaders, your perhaps Jim Jones type. They're very intelligent and very engaging, and they can play around with ideas a lot. And to them, it's a mental exercise. But anyway, they're not necessarily going to be going for everyone that's available. And then, so you could have a 0 on that very easily. Early behavior problems. Okay, let's say you spent a lot of time in the principal's office when you were a kid, when you were in junior high, you did stuff that if you'd have been caught, you'd have been in trouble, and so forth. So but maybe you put a 1 because you're not exactly one of those people that was going out there and robbing banks or beating people up. Lack of realistic long-term goals. Maybe you're a young person and you think, I'm going to be president someday. Well, a lot of the people that do wind up president, that's their goal when they're very young. Okay. But let's say you give yourself a 1 on that, maybe a 2. Impulsivity seems to go into poor behavioral controls, but, kind of going out there and giving in to temptation. So let's say you give yourself a 2 on that one. Irresponsibility, maybe you're just a 1. Failure to accept responsibility for your own actions. You're blaming other people all the time. Well, maybe you put down maybe I'm a 2 on that one. Many short-term marital relationships. Maybe you've been married to the same person or you've been going out with the same person for years. So that wouldn't count. Juvenile delinquency, as I said, now that could depend on if you got caught or not. But for juvenile delinquency, you should look at things like, what if I had been caught? And maybe that's another 1. Now we're getting into those kind of conduct disorders here. Okay, conduct disorders are the things where they kind of relate to more of your actions versus your personality. And then revocation of conditional release, criminal versatility, and so forth. So maybe you get into this like, at the end, you wind up with a 20. I don't know. I didn't add those up, but you come up with a 20. And, it says, I don't know, congratulations, you're not one, but then some of the tests will say, oh, well, there's reason to be concerned. Okay. And that's what I'm getting into. What exactly are the traits of people who they don't score 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 like that, but it's more like a 2, 2, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 0, 1, that sort of thing. And it doesn't come up to that magical scale, where you get thrown into like the 1 to 3% of the population. So ultimately, I think one of the things you'll see when people get this score is some people will say this is very common for people that are in prison. Now, why is that, do you think? I think there's 2 reasons. 2 reasons. One is because a lot of the studies on criminals will show, well, there's a large percentage of criminals in prison who are psychopathic, but then you get this other big chunk of people who come in when they do these tests at the 15 to 25 range. Okay, they're not quite there, but they're certainly higher than the average person who gets less than 5 on these tests. The average person gets about 3 or 4 when they take these kinds of exams, type things. And that's why I say there may be some validity to many of these kinds of tests to at least give you a little peep into the psyche. Don't diagnose yourself, but it gives you a peek into what could be a possibility. But if you're consistently ranking in the 20s, whereas all your friends are ranking 1, 2, and 3, then there's obviously going to be a little bit of a difference in the way you think about life. Okay? I mean, that's simple. Because these are the kind of questions that are usually kind of the, not for cocktail party admissions. So, therefore, if you're saying, well, I don't have that much empathy, or I never feel guilt, or those kinds of things, then you're not going to admit these kinds of things usually to all your friends. So there's something there that you're probably hiding. Now, the thing is, in prison, the reason why many people wind up in prison is because they don't listen to authority. And that is a major component of psychopathy. Not necessarily, you don't have to be a full-blown psychopath, but it is part of being closer on the spectrum. And you see, in psychology, It's not like when you go, it's totally different than biology in this respect. You go to the doctor, they do a test, and they say, oh, you have a case of, I don't know, you got cancer, let's say. Well, there is no such thing as you have sort of cancer. It's the same way as if you're pregnant. There's no such thing as, well, you're sort of pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. That's the way usually biology works. Okay? But now, if you get into psychology, things are on a spectrum. In the same way as, I guess you could say, skin color. You know, when you say, well, that person's white, that person's black, that person's whatever, that's really difficult sometimes because you've got variations. I mean, I could line up 100 people starting out with someone who's practically albino and go all the way to someone who's very, very, very dark at the other end. But I could find variations, 100 people who have slight variations. And that is the way psychology works. Okay? And so you may have to get above a certain level to actually get a diagnosis, but you may have traits that are similar. And one of those traits, if you're scoring this kind of score, is that you're not going to be someone who conforms. Okay, unless there's something to be gained from it. That's the interesting thing. You're the kind of person who's not going to be usually, because guilt is overlapping in several of these things, including empathy. You're not going to be the kind of person who is going to feel guilty if you don't do something. Now, you may have, because of some of the narcissistic qualities of these tests that they're trying to measure, you may be prone to do things based on wanting a certain status, feeling like this is you, this is a pride you take in accomplishing something. And if you don't accomplish it, then you feel that you failed. But not guilty. You're not going to feel like, oh my gosh, I messed up. And now I feel bad, and I'm going to cry, and I'm going to really just be down and depressed. It's like when a psychopath might set the goal of, well, I'm going to be a virgin until I get married. Okay? There are psychopaths that do. And then they mess up and, let's say it's a female and she has sex with her boyfriend and, and she fails at. Now, she's not going to be, if she's religious, she's not going to be maybe thinking, my gosh, maybe I should go run and make a confession to the priest or something. On the other hand, she may feel in the sense that she might think to herself, how dare he seduce me? Or something like that. Or she may have the attitude of, oh, I failed at this, and I'm really disappointed that I failed at this, in the same way that you feel disappointed when you were in school and you got a B instead of an A. You generally didn't feel guilty for getting the B unless your parents were, made you feel guilty for it. But usually it was just like, oh, I'm disappointed versus, oh no, how could I have done such a thing? I feel so sad about myself. And turning your aggression kind of against yourself, because that's what I think guilt is. Beating yourself over the head with a baton. How dare I? Bonk, bonk, bonk. How dare I feel good because I've done something bad. Okay, that's what guilt's all about. Psychopaths don't feel that, okay? But they can feel the disappointment. Many psychopaths actually do have a sense of responsibility. And this is especially true for the people who maybe are not quite up to the scale of psychopath. The one that's been set by, you could say in psychology you get arbitrary cutoff points and that sort of thing. But you got to have some sort of cutoff point. You have to have some sort of standard. But the thing is, you may have a situation in which these kinds of feelings are going to be shared not just by the clinical psychopath, but the people that are close to it. Where you could easily score a 20 and be someone who does not feel empathy towards other people, or does not feel guilt, and is very manipulative and so forth. Very Machiavellian. Well, the thing is, the other things may add up to where you've always followed the law not necessarily because you felt guilty for breaking it, but you always followed it because you think, gosh, it would really suck to be thrown in jail. it would ruin my chances of getting into college if I have a police record, or I might not be able to get a job if I have a police record. So that could be the thing that holds you back. But it's not going to be oh my gosh, I would feel so bad and just really heartbroken if I did this. Okay? So there is a mechanism of control, because the vast majority of even clinically diagnosed psychopaths do not wind up in prison. Okay? They don't. But I guarantee you that the people who score either clinical or in this, I hate to use the word borderline, okay, because borderline, of course, is a diagnosis for a totally different thing. But if they're kind of borderline psychopath, and some people call it secondary psychopaths, but then it gets mixed up because some people will say, well, no, they're not really psychopaths, they're just pretending to be psychopaths. So let's just say borderline. You're close, okay? But the thing is that you're going to be someone, again, who has these characteristics. And you're probably going to wind up advancing in the areas that a clinical psychopath would advance in. For instance, law, politics. I've seen chefs are on the top 10 professions, acting, journalism, corporate leaders. Let's see some of the others. Emergency room and doctors and surgeons. I will note, though, don't get scared of your doctor, because you shouldn't be scared anyway. The thing is that the doctors that are like general care doctors outside of those areas of surgeons and the emergency room doctors have some of the lowest scores on these kinds of tests. But there's a component maybe of the thrill or the status of these other doctors. And that can mean they can be very good doctors, because they do not want to fail. They are going to make sure you go in there, you get your operation, and you come out A-OK. Because, it's kind of like a score. It's like, yes, I've just done my 100th heart operation, bypass operation, and all 100 survived. Okay? It's not necessarily, you don't need a doctor that's sitting there going, oh my gosh, I sure hope I save this person because he has a wife and 3 kids, and oh my gosh, what do I do? How will I forgive myself if I do something wrong? That sort of thing. It's better maybe to have the person that scores a little high on the psychopath test in that sense. Now, the other thing, though, about empathy, and I think this is kind of an irony, is if you're in the 15 to 25, maybe you have enough empathy to feel it, but not enough to really care and to let it get into your way. All people have empathy, first of all. I always use this analogy. You get this little bar down there on your computer that shows how much you're connected to a Wi-Fi. And if you've got all 5 bars lit up, let's say you're the average person. Okay, let's say that's your empathy bars. And you go down to maybe 2 bars where, you're not getting very good reception. Maybe your system can't handle uploading or downloading a video. And the thing is, with the 2, that's maybe the borderline psychopaths, the people who are close to being psychopathic. And of course, the 1 bar lighting up are the true psychopaths. And it's very easy for people to discount feelings of empathy and so forth if they only have one bar. But it's also going to be easier for the ones with 2. And maybe that kind of empathy where you know what the other person's thinking, so you can use strategy. Again, we get back to Niccolo Machiavelli. You know how to use strategy in order to turn something around and convince that person that they're in the wrong. Okay? Your wife just caught you having an affair with someone. She comes home early, opens the door, there you are. And yet you have the ability to understand where she's coming from. So you're able to turn it around and say that maybe you were doing it to uh, help make yourself a more creative lover or something. Now, that sounds atrocious, but there's people that have used that argument. Or I knew you weren't feeling good, or I felt sorry for your friend. She's in a really hard time right now, and it just happened that I was caring so much for her. I just accidentally gave in, and then she's crying, saying, "I'm sorry. I got down on you. It's okay. It's okay." I mean, people have done that, all right? There's people that have gotten away with that. I would say they're more likely to be in those 15 to 25 ranges. They understand maybe where their spouse is coming from, and then they can turn that around and use that in their favor. Maybe the psychopath just really doesn't even care. He's like, yeah, well, you can leave me. Take it or leave it, or something like that. Maybe the hardcore one that really doesn't understand what the person's thinking. They may on a certain level, but maybe there's a little disconnect. The person that has that second bar lit up has a greater ability to scan and be able to decipher what that person's thinking. Now, of course, the person who maybe, most people that have affairs, of course, are just regular people. Let's say they're a 1 or a 2 or a 3, and they're bawling their heads. "I'm sorry, I've really failed. I failed God. I failed my mom. I failed my marriage," and it really bothers them. Okay, and that's actually a fairly natural reaction. But you can see along this spectrum as to how people will react. So I think maybe some of the best salespeople or best politicians would not necessarily be the people who score 40 and or something, or 30 and above. It might actually be the 15 to 25s. I really do think so, because they understand their audience so much better. Now, the one thing that you have to keep in mind is that the average person who is the average person who is, how do I put this? When a person feels as if what they're doing is wrong, let's say they're trying to sell something that's really not good for people to buy, then the psychopath is going to be much better at it. Because the person who maybe is trying to sell something to an audience that they don't really believe in themselves, they may be able to go through it really well, but they may actually trip up themselves at some point, because there's a part of them that's still eating at them saying, this is not right. They still have enough maybe guilt, even though they may deny it, just enough to be not as convincing as the person who's psychopathic. They're not able, perhaps, maybe to get that signature on the dotted line that makes the sale, that puts the people in debt for the product that is defective or whatever. So people that score between the 15 and 25 still will be open to feelings of, not really wanting to hurt others. And another thing that's very important too is that whereas in the level of fearless dominance, where psychopaths of 30s and above will do things that are dangerous and risky, whether it's financially, physically, sports-wise, those kinds of things, the person 15 to 25 may do it way more than, the regular person, those people that are down there at 3 and 4, but they're also going to be a little bit more cognizant of the consequences. And they're more likely to, instead of driving off the cliff, they're more likely to kind of put the brakes on before they get to the cliff, and and not take a risk that they're going to die flying off the cliff. So in that sense, that's why maybe a lot of these people are better able, even though these studies, of course, are done in prison, they're not done in Congress or something. If they do wind up in prison, maybe it's through embezzling or something like that, but it's usually not murder. So the thing you've got to look at is where a psychopath would look at the 15-25 range and think, oh, you're weak. and then maybe the person gets a 3 or a 4 might be like, this person's got something going on with them, but I just can't figure out what it is, and I don't trust them sometimes. Actually, they probably would trust them because the 15 to 25 person can convince them of so many things. The thing is that they're the strongest. Maybe they're the ones who have just close enough to be able to have the skills that go along with it, but not so far that they are a danger to others and themselves, usually. So you've got to consider these kinds of things. So basically, I would say that the people who score in these ranges are probably very creative people. They're nonconformist. There's actually been listed that having traits of psychopathy is associated with creativity because you don't care what people think. You're more likely to do things that are unusual, be they, if you're an artist, you'll break the bounds. If you're if just in general things, you may take more risk sexually or be more novel about it. And, I don't even want to get into there actually is a genetic component to sexuality too. But the thing is that you're going to be different. People are going to know there's something different about you. And maybe some of those 1s and 2s and 3s may think, I wonder if she's a psychopath, or I wonder if he's a psychopath. But in reality, you're not. But in the same sense, the psychopath may be looking at you going, yeah, are you one of us? Are you part of the vampire clan or something like that? And then, so there is something different, and you're only going to be making up, maybe psychopaths make up 1, 2, 3% of the population, but there's another 4% of people who fall into this higher category that comes close, but not quite there. And I would venture to say that if you got a group of creative people or really good salespeople or super good speakers or politicians together, you'd find that this trait is very prevalent, okay, scoring high in many of these areas. And it doesn't mean that you're full blown. You should look at this like, oh my gosh. And if you go to a psychologist, they're going to talk to you. If you really want to have an actual diagnosis, they're going to talk to you. And they're going to try to figure out, details and how you've thought all your life and how other people have judged you and, all these other things. And then they can make a diagnosis after that. Taking a test is not a diagnosis, but it gives you an insight. And therefore, maybe if you always score this and you're just totally, totally curious, maybe go to a psychologist and see what they think. Okay? If you're up in that 22, 23, 24 range, go and see what they think, and just go from there. But again, this is what I think would characterize these people, the ones who are within that range, and and maybe in a sense these are the people that. These are the CEOs of corporations that don't run their corporations into the ground, as opposed to the ones who do have maybe a 35 on this, and that opens them up to a lot more weaknesses and therefore can cause a lot of destruction in their personal and professional lives. Anyway, I hope that gives you some insights into this topic, and there's various books you can look at and things, and, just keep asking questions and get an idea of what these kind of traits are. If you're one of those people that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 score, then find out what it is that characterizes people that might be in those other 2 categories, whether it's the 15 to 25 or the 30s and above. And it might help you in politics. It also helps you to basically get past this whole idea that often, you just insult people. It's like, oh, Hillary Clinton must be a psychopath, or oh, Donald Trump must be a psychopath, or something. Now, maybe they are, maybe one of them is, maybe neither of them are, but what you need to do is be able to evaluate and not just yell it out as an insult. There's so many videos out there, this person's a sociopath. When you actually look at how they're judging them, you're thinking, no, this is not according to the criteria that's been around even before Checkley. Okay? It's just someone doesn't like this politician and they don't like how they behave, and so therefore they just go ahead and say they're a sociopath. Or it's like, by the way, there's no sociopath isn't even used hardly anymore unless it's out there in internet land. So keep these things in mind. I wonder many times if people in, journalism schools nowadays are really learning what the term analysis means. It means that you try to get into the mind of your opponent. That's one component of it. Try to understand what all the sides in an issue are thinking, what their motivations are, what the consequences are to the individual, the group, and the society at large. And it just seems that we've kind of lost that. Seems like that, if you look at news articles 30 years ago, they seem like college text compared to what we get today. But anyway, I'm going to go into an area where I really am worried that our ability at analysis is going to get even more diluted in the popular society. And that's not even with just the media being involved in this. And that is, I think it's safe to say that we are being drowned or becoming submerged in a kind of quicksand of social media. That means, the idea of social media is good. And we could say that, I'd say, well, since 2008, social media has dominated a great deal of our election process. And to a large degree, that has taken away some of the power of the corporate media. Because people can communicate, they can share, they can interact with people all over the world and be able to not have to depend on, an article that might only hit, let's say there's a special publication that only has maybe 20,000 subscribers, but it's a very important piece of news or information. Well, it's not going to hit that many people, but with social media, that can be shared and shared and shared and might reach millions of people by the time it's over. And that's a good thing. But I'm wondering if maybe sometimes a little bit too much of a good thing can be dangerous. And let me go into some examples of that. And that is this. If we look at the election, the Trump versus Hillary election that was held just recently, one of the real main differences was the effect of Twitter. I mean, it seemed like Donald Trump had some sort of strange implant that, he was continuously on Twitter. Now, the thing is about Twitter, although it's not one of my personal favorite media platforms, the problem with it, it seems to have taken that concept of the soundbite. The soundbite. It's where when an interview is taking place with someone, that particular someone, if they're smart, will try to figure out what that reporter is looking for, and then they'll design a zinger, a little statement that will be taken into whatever part of his or her presentation is actually shared with the public. Okay? That's a soundbite. About a one sentence or even less. It gets out there and people remember. And Twitter seems to be based on it. You come up with a cool sentence, maybe supply a link, and you send it out to your followers, hoping that it'll be retweeted out to other followers and start taking a life of its own. And then people, when they're reading their feed, will see that and go, oh, wow, that's cool, and so forth. My problem with the soundbite and the Twitter comment that generally you see, which, again, it's just usually about a sentence with or without a link, is that it really doesn't have context. You don't really hear a lot about the issue. And what's really bothering me is I'm now starting to see national publications. And this is true for both the left and the right, okay? I like to go through everything. I like to read what all sides are saying, okay? But the thing is, I'm noticing now that articles are starting to get shorter. And often, there's not even an article at all. It'll be maybe a paragraph. And then you'll see a bunch of people's Twitter feeds. And with maybe a sentence in between, making a comment of, the person making a comment of their own. And that's troublesome. I mean, it makes me think back to that scene in 1984. If you haven't seen the movie, the one with Richard Burton in it, you really ought to. Okay? It's a classic. And of course, based on a classic book. But anyway, there's a scene in which Winston is talking to someone at the center they work for. They're not actually just regular people. They're part of the people who doctor the news. So it fits what Big Brother wants it to say. And there's a scene in which his friend is, sitting there saying, in the future, we're getting rid of words and we're getting everything condensed, and the dictionary is going to get smaller, and eventually, and I think he says something like in 100 years, a person won't even be able to have a conversation. And you think about that within the context of when Orwell wrote it. And then you look at today's society and you're thinking, whoa, this might actually happen. I mean, I think we're probably going to start losing words because the people aren't reading as much anymore. People aren't really maybe having a thirst for analysis in publications. And if publications notice, get this, if, regardless of how you feel about the corporate media, this is true too for the independent media. If they start noticing that they get maybe 100,000 people visit a particular article that is just a little short little thing with some Twitter feed and stuff, doesn't take much at all to really put it together, and then they notice that there is an article that really goes into depth about a particular issue, maybe the same issue that, with all the Twitter feed, but it only gets 15,000 visitors, that is going to really influence the way that news articles are going to be published. You're not going to see so many words. You're going to tell someone when they're writing a story, shorten it, make it more concise, to the point, add some Twitter examples to make your point from celebrities or politicians. I was going to say academics, but I'm not sure academics get on Twitter and send out something about their recent research. But the thing is, we're going to see maybe less people reading what few things we have out there that actually do go into depth and really dig deep into issues and policies and so forth. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Twitter. It's got its use. Again, you can connect, share, but most of it really is, it seems to me, sound bites. Little short things, Take a look for yourself. By the way, if you're on Twitter, I gotta make this, little push here. Go ahead and you can follow me. I don't make very many posts, but when I do, it's important. So it's Psycho Mike 777. Okay, Psycho Mike 777. Okay, now I'm making a plug for Twitter. Again, though, I haven't condemned Twitter at all. It's the users that are sending these things out. And the media that's actually taking this and, basically adapting the media to the social media. Then I'm looking at this other thing, and that's memes. Now, memes, when I first heard about them, I was like, well, what's a meme? I mean, I don't know whether this was like 5 or 6 years ago that I first heard about memes. But they've really taken off to where the point that politicians spend lots of money on people. Their whole job is to create memes to send out onto the internet in order to get people to identify emotionally, or using comedy to either make a point positive for them or to really ridicule the other side. Now, the memes, to me, they tend to reduce an issue to the micro components, again, without context. They're funny. They're funny to use. I've noticed that if you go onto a political forum, there are times when someone will write, this really in-depth response. And you're just thinking, you know what? I saw a meme the other day. I'm just going to post that. So you post the meme. And then that person will be like, I wrote this really in-depth response, and you just put a meme up. And then you respond with a meme. And it kills the argument. And the thing is that I'll make an excuse here. With adults, you probably have a certain context going on. You probably understand more of the issue, and you assume that the person that you're debating with and the people reading it understand the issue far more in depth than just the meme. But I've noticed something. A lot of young people out there, smart young people, are quoting memes. I've seen people actually, you get a discussion with them, 18, 19, 20 years old, and they'll say something that is a meme because you saw it the other day. Maybe it was on your Facebook feed or something like that. And they'll quote it as if it were true. Okay? I saw a meme the other day. It was kind of ridiculing Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving. It shows a picture of the pilgrims and the Indians eating. And it says, what better way to show love than to invite your friends over for dinner and then kill them the next day? Now, the thing is, if you know the true history of Thanksgiving and the true history of what was going on then and what actually did tend to reduce the population of American Indians, that being the diseases that were brought over by the colonists, no fault of theirs. It would be like if we went to another planet, just randomly, you step through a portal and boom, you're on that other planet. Like in that, what was the name of that movie, TV series, Stargate. The one thing they forget about in Stargate is if you walk through this portal, maybe that flu you had that you're just getting over or something, you just wiped out the entire planet because they had no immunity to it. And so the thing is, there's the context. But if you read these kinds of things, you start thinking, oh, the pilgrims just massacred everyone after the event. And that's not true. Okay? But if you read this kind of stuff over and over and over and over and over again, and you don't have the context of a really in-depth study of history, which a lot of people in America really don't have, okay, then it is damaging. And so this is a problem here too with the social media. And I would tend to think that maybe, kids 30 years ago that did not have social media probably learned how to investigate much better than when they're spending 6 and 7 hours on the internet every day, inundated with this stuff. Maybe they had a better ability to at least question and analyze and so forth. Another thing I'm noticing too about people that spend a lot of time on social media is they seem to start doing something called confirmation bias. And what that is that we tend to go into things that confirm that we're right. And we try to find things from the other side that confirm just how awful the other side is. And believe me, no matter what the issue, organization, whatever, you can find wonderful aspects of it and you can find awful aspects of it. But we're starting to get into this confirmation bias where we sit around and it's like being in a crowd, okay? It's like being in this big crowd, and you know how crowds work, one person, yells, break the window, and someone else says, no, lynch the sheriff, and something like from, old westerns or something like that. And people just tend to kind of try to escalate in order to get attention. And then the crowd just starts taking a mind of its own, or the transference of the ego onto the group. And I think we're seeing this a lot in regards to the election in 2016, where the people that were for Trump, they were confirming how wonderful they were and patriotic and everything, grand. The people that were against Trump were doing the same thing, actually, for the most part. I'm not talking about the people that go out and burn stuff down or throw stuff or try to ban free speech and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the regular person. But then at the same time, both sides were trying to demonize the other, to the point that right now we've really poisoned the body politic. People are so angry at each other that I read an article, and if you're listening to this on YouTube later, maybe dated, but people are worried about the holidays this year, because Thanksgiving, they're worried that, oh my gosh, the kids, they voted for Trump, and grandma hates Trump and voted for Hillary, and there's going to be a huge fight. Okay? This is because of social media. Because what normally in the old days would have just been, a knockdown, drag out fight, and then it's over, shake hands, and, come back 4 years later. No, it's not going to have a chance to heal. Okay? People are going to go on social media and they're just going to continue this fight that took place during the election. Maybe there won't be as many people involved, but there's going to be enough that it's not going to die down. It's not. Now, by the way, I'm not saying anything should be curbed about social media, but I just think we need to take a look at it. Okay? At least from a sociological or psychological point of view. Now, the other thing that maybe hurting is, again, I mentioned how many hours people are spending on social media. Now, again, a lot of it's good. All right? I have found lots of really important information out there on social media. But I use this example with my daughter, who sometimes has a really hard time going to bed at night, because she's on Instagram and Facebook and all these other social media platforms. Flipping through them. Looks like some sort of science fiction thing where you got the robot going, I'm like going, hey, wait a minute, how can you even know what's being said there? The thing is that I think often it's kind of like when you're eating potato chips. You know the feeling, right? You've become satisfied. You got your salt craving out of the way, or whatever craving you were feeling like. The potato chips have now satisfied it. However, you don't want to stop until you get to one of those really perfect ones that's just covered with, monosodium glutamate or whatever they put on those things. And it's just going to give your taste buds this like, whoa! And then you can just wrap up the package and put it away. And what happens? You often wind up finishing the bag off because you just can't find that one wonderful chip. Or you eat a whole bunch of them until you do find a wonderful one. But nevertheless, you were satisfied maybe 30 or 40 chips before. But you had to have that special one. And this is happening to a lot of people. And I'm not just zeroing in on young adults. I'm zeroing in, too, I'm seeing this with elderly people. They're flipping through, and you're like, I thought you were going to go to bed early. And they're kind of like, well, just a minute. And again, you're just trying to find something that's going to be that wow story that made the last 3 hours of surfing through your social media worth it. And this is something that's, again, quite troubling, we are becoming addicted to it. Now, I heard this. I haven't been able to find the study. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not out there. But I heard that nowadays, if you show a picture of a person's boyfriend, girlfriend, or their wife or husband to them, there's a certain chemical reaction that takes place in their brain. And, it's the dopamine and so forth that goes out, pleasure, like, yay, I like this person, I'm looking forward to seeing them again. But now they're finding that people have that same response to their iPhones. I mean, we have relationships, biochemical relationships with our phones and computers that bring us this wonderful world of pretty people, that go to glamour shots and get the right picture, or making the most wonderful statement, or, what's even worse is these misleading videos. I see these all the time on Facebook and so forth, in which they're not actually lying, but you cut words out and you don't show context. Again, social media is very bad for context. And they put on these things, and I don't care which candidate or cause you're aiming for. They make the person look demonic, or they make them look angelic, one of the two. But you can look at these things and they're absurd, but then you look and it says 24 million views. And you're going, oh my gosh, 24 million or more. But nevertheless, even if it was 700,000, I saw one, just a few minutes ago, 700,000 views. It's still reaching a lot of people, and people read that, and they're probably going to read the stuff that they agree with already. But then they read about a politician or whatever, and then they're going, my gosh, it's worse than I thought. He or she is really evil. They think every time they see this person, it's going to be like music from The Omen playing in the background, like when Damon shows up on the scene. The thing is that, again, I wouldn't go out there like, they're talking about with Facebook, oh, we're going to get rid of fake news. I've seen some pretty lousy fake news stuff out there. It really irritates me when I see a headline and I'm going, is that real or is it not? And then I go to it and, they're quoting a movie star's name, as being an expert on nuclear physics. And you know very well that this is a fake news site. But I would rather put up with a few fake news sites because I still have enough faith that we have not reached the level of idiocracy to where, people will know what is fake and what isn't. And there is a certain level of discernment that they will have. I'm really worried that what you'll have is people coming in and wanting to say, well, I don't really agree with this story, so therefore it's fake, so therefore it's a fake news site. That's very dangerous. That's extremely dangerous. So while I'm saying that we really need to look at the media, we need to look at social media, we need to examine it, we need to perhaps even teach people, maybe there should be classes in school about how to wisely use social media and not let it use you. I wouldn't go in there and let the government control it, put restrictions on it, and, basically mess around with freedom of speech. Anyway, we're running out of time here. So, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you'll tune in next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Take care now.
You are listening to UCY.